Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and we are go for 3 in 23. Now, I say that every single day. The sign right there tells you go for 3 in 23, but we have never been more go for 3 in 23 than we are right now, courtesy of our friends at Dr. Pepper. How about the College Football Playoff National Championship Trophy right here in our studio today? We told you yesterday we're going to have this, and today we do. Now, in addition to that, our good buddy Jonathan from Dr. Pepper has also brought all kinds of great Dr. Pepper samples for us to try throughout the day there as well. So that, for me, is a very good thing. I've even got my Dr. Pepper shirt on today. Let's see if I can close my laptop so you can see that. I've even got my Dr. Pepper shirt on today, which is a really good thing. But you got to understand something, y'all. I have loved college football for a long time, and obviously been a big, Dr. Pepper drinker for a long time there as well. To actually have this trophy in our building today, courtesy of our friends at Dr. Pepper, is really a special moment for me. And so many of you have said nice things about that, and I really appreciate that. And it makes the whole idea of go for 3 in 23 just sort of, it hits a little different on a day like this. It rings more true today than it's ever done before. So we're really excited to have you with us for the program. Now, we got final thoughts on Georgia Ole Miss today, beginning with this. Kirby Smart has issued a direct challenge to you and you and you and you and everybody out there, and he does not hold back. Kirby Smart turning his attention to the fans, speaking to you as clearly as he would speak to his own players when it comes to his goals and objectives for you on this particular Saturday. We're going to tell you all about that. There's also one thing I sort of wish was a little bit different about this game on Saturday, but we're going to kind of make peace with it being the way that it is. We'll tell you about that here as well. And we will address what is a little bit of a burgeoning controversy around Lane Kiffin, the other coach in this game, ahead of Saturday's showdown. So we're going to cover all of those bases here today, plus final thoughts on the other big games on Saturday for the other teams around college football who'll never get as close to this championship trophy as I am right now. So what do you say we get it started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I want to speak directly to our podcast audience to begin today's show, because if you can find your way to one of our video platforms, YouTube perhaps, DawgNation.com, that's easy to do now, Facebook, something like that, it's worth your time just to see the beginning of our show today, because for a few minutes here off the top, I am very lucky to have the National Championship Trophy. When we say go for 3 in 23, this is what we're going for. This is what Georgia's chasing after, that National Championship Trophy. It's in our studio today, courtesy of our friends at Dr. Pepper. This is one of the great thrills for me professionally that I've ever had, to be in broadcasting in such close proximity here to this in our tiny little studio. We got this Dr. Pepper National Championship Trophy on hand. It is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Now, I'll also tell you this. It's not just me that gets a chance to be close to this today. If you want to be near the Walmart in Oakwood today, coming up from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., or the Walmart there, Epps Bridge Road in Athens from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. If you want to be, at those spots later on today, here on this Friday, you have a chance to perhaps see the National Championship Trophy up close and personal as well, courtesy of Dr. Pepper. But they were kind enough today to bring this here to us, to give us a chance to have this here in our studio. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that, because, it just makes the whole idea of go for 3 in 23. It just rings a little bit more true. It hits a little different when you got that trophy, the thing that Georgia's chasing after. Hopefully later on this year, when Kirby Smart holds that up and kind of kisses it the way that he did last year, when Georgia players get their own chance to do that, it's the same trophy that's sitting here right now. They make a new one of these each and every year, and it's kind of fascinating to watch this kind of be rolled in, and kind of the pomp and the circumstance that goes along with that. If you're watching on video, the gold part up at the top, that's 20 pounds. It's made by the same people who make the Academy Awards, the Oscars. You see those. It's basically the same kind of process there on that. The base itself weighs 30 pounds, very heavy, very substantial. It's traveled already 60,000 miles here this year, 72 different places. which is kind of nice of our friends at Dr. Pepper to give other people a chance to see it, because ultimately we know that the place it's going to stay is the place it's been the last 2 years right here at Georgia. But giving other folks a chance to see that, I guess that's probably kind of a nice thing to do. So kind of nice to allow folks to dream and have ambitions and aspirations, even if deep down we know go for 3 and 23 is a mission that Georgia will complete, and the national championship trophy will have the same home this year that it's had for the last couple of years. Still nice to give other folks a chance to see that. And truly and sincerely, this is one of the great thrills for me to have this in studio today. So a huge thanks and appreciation to our friends at Dr. Pepper for that. Now, let me begin this way here today. So earlier this week on the show, in my kind of typical fashion, as politely as I'm capable of, as gently as perhaps I thought was appropriate, because listen, I don't like calling out Georgia fans very much because my livelihood depends on Georgia fans. So therefore, I don't bite the hand that feeds me, very frequently. But every now and then, as I said on Monday's show, and if you watch Monday's show, or if you listen to Monday's show, you heard me say the phrase this way. Every now and then, friends have to be honest with each other. I consider you all to be my friends, even if we don't ever meet personally. We all kind of share the same affinity for Georgia football. We perhaps see the world in the same way. Certainly, we see the sport in the same way. Therefore, we have a relationship with each other, even if we're, not ever kind of in the same place at the same time, are personally acquainted with each other. And friends being honest with friends, what I said is sort of felt like the atmosphere for this game last Saturday against Missouri could have perhaps been better. Tried to be as polite as possible, tried to make the suggestion as gently as possible. That is perhaps a little bit more in keeping with my personality. But as you know, Kirby Smart's personality is not like my personality. And a couple of times thus far this week, Kirby Smart, when asked directly about the impact that fans could have on Saturday's game against Ole Miss, has not held back in saying, hey, we need the fans to be at their best. Well, guess what? Here we are now in kind of the final 24, 48 hours, prior to kickoff, going back to yesterday, the kind of the last couple of days prior to kickoff. And all of a sudden, Kirby Smart has ratcheted up the challenge to fans to a much higher level. The same level of clarity and force and magnitude of Smart's words when he's speaking to his team, he is now directing all of that towards you there as well. Now, my guess is all of you will be more than happy to meet Smart's challenge on this, but it is unmistakable that the sort of gentle, kind of calm, hey, maybe it'd be a nice thing if some of y'all were a little bit louder on Saturday. Kirby Smart's not speaking that way. Kirby Smart's speaking to you directly as if you were one of his players. Let me start on the platform now called X, formerly known as Twitter. Smart yesterday on the social media platform saying it directly to UGA fans via social media here on this. How are you going to affect the game Saturday, he asks. Let's make this the loudest that Sanford Stadium has ever been. That's a direct question to Georgia fans. If you're lucky enough to have a ticket, being there in the stadium, how are you going to impact it? What kind of fingerprint are you going to put on this game there on Saturday? Smart says we want it louder than it's ever been before. Now, a year ago, he told you before the Tennessee game that if you can talk when you leave, you didn't yell loud enough. So Smart now says, I want it even louder than that. Now, this is where some people are going to come in, but it's supposed to be raining, and it's supposed to be cold, and but this, and but that, and na. Once again, this is Kirby Smart speaking to you directly as if you were one of his players, because yesterday he goes on the Atlanta sports radio station 680 The Fan. The host is a guy named Buck Bellew, former Georgia quarterback. And in speaking with Buck Bellew on 680 The Fan yesterday, Kirby Smart addressed all of that. Once again, the whole idea of me kind of somewhat casually, perhaps politely suggesting maybe it might be a good idea to be a little louder this time than last time. Kirby Smart has no such propensity for politeness. Kirby Smart speaks to you directly as if he would speak to anybody here. Clear call out, direct message to UGA fans, strong words from Smart. Go ahead and take a listen to this.
Coach, these fans, what kind of message do you have for them this week?
Bring it. I don't want to hear anything about the weather or the temperature. We got to bring it. We got to have the best fans in the country, and they got to be loud and impact this game. And no wine and cheese party. We got to be rough and rowdy for this one.
That may be the single best thing I've ever heard Kirby Smart say. The single most enjoyable handful of sentences that Smart's ever spoken, it may be those right there. This ain't going to be no wine and cheese party. And you know that phrase, right? It's like, this is like going back time in memoriam, right? It's like when, certain people in the stadium don't want to make a bunch of noise. You kind of call those are the wine and cheese fans. They're the ones that sort of sit on their hands. They're the ones that sort of look at you funny if you try to stand up and cheer. Kirby Smart says, Saturday is not a wine and cheese party day. Saturday is not a day for the wine and cheese crowd. For the people who lift their pinky in the air as they're, sipping on their, whatever, brandy after dinner, whatever their thing is. This is not a day for the wine and cheese crowd. This is a day for, Kirby Smart says, the rough and rowdy crowd. Y'all, that's a direct call out right there. And I think it tells you everything you need to know about how Smart views this game on Saturday. What an incredible opportunity this is for Georgia fans to put their stamp on this season one more time. You already know the scenario. It's the last home game. We make a big deal about this. I don't want to repeat myself, but it's always amazing to me how quickly all of this sort of gets away from us. We dream about the season. We dream about being between the hedges, and then boom, few times, all of a sudden now you're doing it for the last time, knowing you'll never get a chance to do this again. Not never, but you won't get a chance to do this again for many months until the new season starts again later on. This is your last chance to see Georgia between the hedges. This is your last chance to show this senior class on Senior Day what these players have meant to you personally. For outstanding juniors like what we believe Brock Bowers may be, playing his last game, perhaps stepping on the field, kind of heroically coming off after injury to be back out there again. This is your last chance to show these guys what they mean to you. And it's your last chance to be a truly impactful part of a story for Georgia, which could conclude with go for 3 in 23. This national championship trophy that's over my shoulder, this is the thing that can be in Georgia's possession. But getting it done tomorrow against a top 10 team like Ole Miss is going to take everybody in the stadium, combating the weather, combating the conditions if possible, and combating Ole Miss. We gave you quotes yesterday from Lane Kiffin. He thinks he's lying in the weeds. He thinks he's waiting. He thinks he's relaxed. His team's not uptight and nervous like they were against Alabama. They're ready for this game on Saturday. Well, tomorrow is your day to show Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin and the entire college football world that Georgia fans are ready there as well. Kirby Smart says, don't be a wine and cheese fan. Be a rough and rowdy fan. Don't let the weather bother you. Don't let the rain bother you. If you're lucky enough to have tickets, put them to good use by making this a house of horrors for the Ole Miss Rebels there on Saturday. That is the direct challenge that Kirby Smart issues to UGA fans. And my guess is Georgia fans tomorrow are more than ready to answer the call. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by our friends at Kroger. And we're going to get ready to say goodbye to the National Championship Trophy. They're going to come in here and they're going to take that out, going to roll that on. They've got a big tour of events to take the National Championship Trophy to today, so we're going to let them do that here. You may hear a little bit of hustling and bustling as the trophy gets rolled out. We're just going to let them do that today. And, of course, you have a chance to be in Oakwood later on. Starting at 11:30 a.m. at the Walmart there, or 1:30 p.m. there. I should say 3 p.m., let me say. 3 p.m. there as well at the Walmart, Epps Bridge Road in Athens. You have your chance to see that National Championship Trophy. That's really, really good stuff. And so over the course of the next couple of minutes, they'll be kind of moving that out and getting ready to do that. And you'll have a chance to probably hear that a little bit, but we're okay on all of that. Let me say thanks, as always, for those who joined the show. 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com. DawgNation app. Of course, we are 10 a.m. after that across every other video platform there as well. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else in between, including posting the show each and every day at the world-famous DawgNation.com. We just really appreciate you finding a platform that works for you and being a part of our show each and every day. Also, big thanks to Kroger, who make it all possible today for you there as well. And how about Kroger Chef Jr., guided kids cooking experience? And for the month of November, a really fun food item being made. How about the pumpkin pie dip? That's tomorrow, November the 11th, at select Kroger locations. A really fun thing, the pumpkin pie dip at Kroger locations all across our area tomorrow. So if you want to be a part of this, if you've never gotten a chance to do this, it's a great time to do it. Go to KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. It's the word junior spelled out, Junior, KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. It's just $7 per child. You get a chance to not just make the pumpkin pie dip, but you also get a chance to get the apron, the chef's hat, the recipe card holder, and the measuring cup, and it's just $7 per child. A really, really fun thing to do if you've never done this before. KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. We certainly appreciate our friends at Kroger being a part of DawgNation Daily here today. And as that National Championship Trophy rolls out of here one more time, big thanks to our friends at Dr. Pepper for making this a ton of fun, a great experience. How much fun is this today to have that National Championship Trophy right here in the building? And I wish you guys could see the efficiency of the process as the championship trophy comes in and goes out, and the great security detail that goes along with that. It's a fun thing to see and a fun thing to be able to be a part of. Now, what else is fun? Coming up in a couple of minutes, we've got Jeff Sintel here today. We'll talk the latest UGA recruiting news with him. And if you'll allow me to be slightly nostalgic for a moment, one of the things we're going to talk to Jeff about today is a guy that for many, many years, Jeff and I talked about in the space of, hey, future dog, 5-star recruit. All of a sudden, he's truly all grown up now. And it's kind of fun to see him being a big part of Saturday's game. So we'll get to this here coming up in just a little bit there as well. That's going to be a fun discussion. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse. And it's poured today by our friends at the Finished Long Drink. Now, let me confess here something for a moment. I am like over the moon excited about Saturday, as you can probably imagine. I know many of you are there as well. However, I do have to confess like one tiny thing. And this is more like not just about Georgia football specifically speaking, but in some respects, this is kind of about sports generally speaking. There's sort of one thing about this game that sometimes I think I probably wish was a little bit different, but eventually you just sort of make peace with. This is just sort of the way sports is, and it probably reflects human nature to a certain degree. What I'm talking about is this. When you see Lane Kiffin, a very boisterous personality, and some of the things that Kiffin puts out on social media, like, do you remember, was it 2 years ago around, like, whatever holiday that was, when Kiffin, when he put out the graphic of, like, Nick Saban holding Kirby Smart as if Saban was the daddy and Kirby Smart was the baby, and, like the insinuation being that Nick Saban was Kirby Smart's daddy, and, Georgia fans kind of saw that big reaction. When Kirby Smart was asked about it, he's like, Lane Kiffin already shown that to me. He put that in a text thread. We were already kind of laughing about that already. In other words, when you see stuff like that Lane Kiffin puts out on social media sometimes, there's this, I think, sort of natural temptation among Georgia fans to sort of view Kiffin as the enemy, and you kind of want your coach, Kirby Smart, to hate their coach, the enemy. But the truth is this is also a profession for guys like Kiffin and Kirby and all these guys, and much the same way you sort of develop like a colleague relationship. Many of the times you become friends with the people not just that work in your company, but sometimes just sort of work in your industry. You see them at trade shows, or you see them out and about in the field. You just kind of become friends with people in your industry. The coaches are not immune to that. Sometimes the only people that truly understand what their life is like are the other people who do that job for a living. And so therefore, Kirby and Lane on the same staff together at Alabama, traveling in some of the same circles as kind of coaches do, they are more friends than enemies, even though sometimes you sort of wish it perhaps is different. It's same thing like professional sports, where it's like you want your team to hate the other team, but the truth is there's free agency and there's guys that live in the same places during the winter or whatever else, that there's relationships there that sometimes sort of supersede just the competitor thing that goes on in professional sports. You don't perhaps like to think that that is true, but it is one of those things that's probably true from time to time. And in the case of Kirby Smart and Lane Kiffin, they do truly have a relationship. Lane Kiffin has not shied away from saying that here this week. Yeah, Kirby's my friend. Kirby Smart himself has not kind of shied away from speaking about that either, including the idea that perhaps sometimes they even share some information. Now, not the sign stealing stuff, the way the Big Ten apparently does, or at least allegedly, but they do share, various information. They do have kind of a relationship where Kirby has a pretty deep relationship with a lot of the guys that he's coached with before. This is what Kirby said about that a little earlier this week. Kirby Smart on the idea of his relationship with Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, I mean, Kirby's definitely one of the
That's
most
actually Jake Fromm. Do we have Kirby Smart on this? All right, so we'll get to that here in just a moment. Kirby Smart sort of talking about that, of the relationship that he has. All right, we do have that now. All right, let's take a listen to this.
I have a lot of respect for Lane. I've told you that. He and I shared seats next to each other at Alabama for, 2 years, I guess it was, maybe 3. I don't ever know how long we were there together because it all runs together. But a lot of respect for him as a coach. He was a head coach at a really young age. He taught me a lot of things about what he believes and being a head coach and doing it your way. And he certainly had a unique experience in terms of the places he's been able to work as a head coach, and he draws on that. And there's times we share ideas or GPS numbers or whatever, but there's nothing outside of just a really good friendship and respect.
Most of you are aware, but when Kirby references the GPS number, what he's talking about is the speeds and the data from like individual players during practice. That's not like directions how to get somewhere. That's the GPS numbers they're seeing on players during practice who wear those little apparatuses on their body there. But so Kirby says, yeah, I got a relationship with Lane Kiffin. We share stuff. We've been friends, going back to our time being in Alabama there. Now, on the one hand, I think it's actually good that Kirby has friends. I think you can sometimes see coaches, and sometimes these are famous coaches. You can sort of tell they don't have friends, and I think not having friends probably makes you a little weird, and I think that weird can be a little bit of an obstacle to professional success. So the fact that Kirby has friends is probably a good thing. But there's this kind of storyline that many of us like to write for ourselves of, boy, it'd be cool to think that Kirby hates Lane, because I've told you before, Lane Kiffin's not exactly my cup of tea. I sort of enjoy rooting against Lane Kiffin. It'd be nice to think that Kirby Smart dislikes this guy as much as I sort of perceive myself disliking him. Or perhaps other coaches around college football that sometimes Kirby might do battle with. You sort of wish sometimes maybe they were enemies like you sort of want your coach to be. But what if I told you there was perhaps a little bit of a different spin you could perhaps put on this? I talked to Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback, about this a little earlier this week. And, of course, Jake was Kirby's quarterback for 3 years. And so Jake saw Kirby as a coach do battle with all kinds of different coaches. And some of those coaches were guys that maybe you sort of perceive Kirby actually disliking, truly hating maybe. And in some cases, these are guys that happen to be rival coaches, but he also happens to have a long-standing friendship with them. What Jake Fromm told us is that actually, even when Kirby's going up against his friends, perhaps especially when he's going up against his friends, that's actually perhaps bringing out even more competitive and fire for Kirby, that maybe he wants to win that game even more than he does one of these games in which he doesn't have quite as deep a relationship. It's a little bit of an interesting spin on all of this. This is what Jake Fromm said about that on our show, going back, I guess it was yesterday on our program.
Yeah, I mean, Kirby's definitely one of the most competitive human beings that I know. And so, obviously, yes, he wants to beat, quote-unquote, maybe enemy coaches, but even more so, he wants to beat his buddies, because he wants those bragging rights whenever they get together, whenever they hang out, whenever they see each other next. I promise nobody wants it more than him, especially in these type of situations. So, I always noticed it, especially more on Florida Week. And then I think even more with this one too as well, just with their time there at Alabama. Yeah, I mean, you could see it probably being a little personal, but he'll never let it seep into the players, so to speak. But he definitely wants it for sure.
I think that's a really intriguing level of insight from Jake Fromm. It's the kind of thing you'd have to know Kirby on a very deep personal level to perhaps be able to explain. Jake Fromm obviously does, so it gives him that insight to be able to share that just because they're friends, sometimes I sort of wish Kirby wouldn't be friends with guys that I don't think that I like. Certainly not my place to tell Kirby who he can and can't be a friend with. I'm just saying, you might wish it was a little bit different than that if there's a coach that you sort of view as a rival, a coach you sort of view as a little bit of a villain. But what Jake Fromm says, actually, it's that guy that Kirby's friends with, whoever that might be in any given year. That's the guy that Kirby perhaps wants to beat even more. And maybe some of you who've competed alongside your friends, maybe you have, some understanding into how it is that Kirby Smart could feel that way. Pretty interesting stuff as it relates to Jake Fromm. Now, as a part of Around the Doghouse, let me also kind of shift gears to something else here for a moment, squeeze one more story into our kind of show opening here for a moment. As Lane Kiffin gets ready to come to Athens tomorrow and coach against Georgia, he's obviously not shied away from talking about what a big game this is for him, one of the biggest he's ever coached, certainly since being at Ole Miss. There also seems to be a little bit of a burgeoning controversy around Kiffin there a little bit there as well. There's a former defensive lineman at Ole Miss, I should say, named DeSanto Rollins, who is suing Ole Miss and suing Kiffin personally, suing over what he kind of views as mistreatment based on some mental illness issues that he said he was suffering from, mental health issues, some other things there as well. And Front Office Sports, which is a media entity, has obtained a recording of Kiffin that Kiffin did not know was being recorded, speaking to Rollins. This has gotten a lot of attention here over the course of the last day or so. Rollins apparently secretly recording Kiffin here on the discussion of how Rollins was being treated after he said that he was dealing with some mental health issues. You're going to hear, obviously, Kiffin speaking harshly to Rollins. There's some foul language here, too, that is bleeped out. So a little bit of a warning to you on that. If you've got kids listening or something like that, we do have some bleeped out language coming here in just a moment. But this has gotten some attention. It would seem to be the wrong kind of attention for Lane Kiffin prior to game on Saturday, like the one that's about to be played here. Front Office Sports obtaining this recording of Kiffin essentially kicking Rollins off the team and, telling him that even with mental health issues, that Kiffin believed he was well within his rights to do so. Take a listen to this coming out just this week.
If you would have come here when you kept getting messages the head coach wants to talk to you, and you saying, I'm not ready to talk to him?
I wasn't.
Well, what world do you live in?
I don't see why you gotta be disrespectful, honestly.
Get out of here. Go. You're off the team. You're done. See ya.
Because I'm...
See ya. Go. And guess what? We can kick you off the team. So go read your rights about mental health. We can kick you off the team for not showing up. When the head coach has to meet with you and you don't show up for weeks, okay, we can remove you from the team. It's called being the It's called hiding behind and not showing up to work.
So this is one of those things that I think is going to probably have a little bit of a generational divide to it. I've heard different reactions to the stuff from Kiffin there. When I hear this, obviously, you're struck by the fact that it is harsh language and it is certainly a very direct message to the player. But you can also, maybe as a slightly older person, understand the frustration that Kiffin was perhaps feeling with the idea that he could not reach the player and the player would not respond to his request to come in there and speak to him. And that even dealing with mental health issues, there's still some expectation for just sort of normal conduct you would expect to take place there on that. That's probably the way that I come down on this. I don't think this is a scandal. I don't think this is some sort of smoking gun that proves something terrible about Lane Kiffin. I think he's probably personally embarrassed that it came out before this game. There's always something that just sort of sounds different when you're hearing someone speak in a manner in which they think is private. Kiffin, obviously, in this particular case did. Some people are going to try to describe this as some sort of proof that Kiffin has behaved wrongly here. I guess that's ultimately for a court to decide. Obviously, the player in this case, DeSanto Rollins, is suing Ole Miss for a lot of money and making some pretty strong accusations about Kiffin in the midst of doing all of that. So I play this mostly for you just to be aware that it's out there. It's obviously coming out right before the Georgia game, but ultimately I don't really know what that audio necessarily proves about Lane Kiffin. As I said before, I think different people are going to hear different things when they hear that particular exchange, but we at least wanted to make you aware that it is out there, courtesy of Front Office Sports. And that is Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Now, final tailgate opportunity in Athens tomorrow. That means the chance to make the most of the situation no matter what the weather ends up being like. That means in your cooler tomorrow, the Finish Long Drink is a great choice to have for all of that, including for the last game that Georgia will play, not the last game in the Peach State, hopefully the SEC Championship is the last game that Georgia plays in the Peach State here this year, but the last game in Athens, how about that? With 2 more games still to come, hopefully in the Peach State before the year is done, at Tech, and then in Atlanta for the SEC Championship. The point is, in the Peach State, how about some peach-flavored version of the Finish Long Drink? That'd be a great thing to enjoy. Or the Long Drink Cranberry, Long Drink Zero, Long Drink Strong, traditional, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, all kinds of wonderful Finish Long Drink for you to try. So do me a favor, go to the website, thelongdrink.com, put in your zip code, and you can find out where near you can pick up some Finish Long Drink today and make the Finish Long Drink be a big part of your final weekend tailgating here in Athens, or if you're watching from home, a wonderful part of that game day watch party you got going on that perhaps starts early in the morning when the ESPN show comes on the air, rolling all the way through the evening. It's Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit, give you the call of the Dogs trying to knock off the Rebels. So fun day. Finish Long Drink, big part of it, and a big part of Around the Doghouse for you right there as well. All right, before we are done, we have official final predictions. I always like calling them official predictions. As if there's something that designates them officially as opposed to unofficially. But we'll give you our official predictions for the big games, including Georgia Ole Miss here, before we're done today. By the way, pretty hot on the season. Honesty compels me to admit. But for now, on everything related to UGA recruiting, including a former recruit that we once spent a long time talking about, who's now become a pretty big-time big shot, and Saturday will be another reminder of that. Let's cover all of that ground with Jeff Sintel here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
You know, Jeff Sintel, you and I have been doing this for a long time. I don't try to think too much about that. I'm trying to get too sentimental on a week-to-week basis. But my gosh, we have talked about so many recruits over the course of the years who've come through Georgia, who've finished their careers, who've gone on to great things. And sometimes it seems sort of appropriate to kind of look back on, remember when we spent so much time talking about so-and-so? Well, For a good number of years, Jeff, you and I talked a lot about Nolan Smith, the idea that this was the big-time five-star edge rusher. I think that he came at a good time for Georgia because it was on the other side of like the 2018 class, and maybe with the 2018 class, perhaps for Georgia kind of did not really turn out to be. You sort of needed that recruiting reboot after that, and Nolan was a really big part of that, I think. And then Nolan Smith goes on to have a great career at Georgia, first-round pick, and really a now famous and well-known enough figure to be the guest picker for ESPN's College Game Day when it comes to Athens there tomorrow. I don't know. It's fun to think about the young man from Savannah who has really grown up to that point there. You ever look back on some of this stuff, Jeff, and kind of realize where a lot of these guys started when you were covering them as recruits to where they are now?
Brandon, hey, man, good morning, man, all the time, man. You don't get me started. My family, around holidays and big moments, they start calling me sentimental because I get sentimental, man, about stuff like this, man. Nolan was a guy that I think kind of ushered in that Georgia could get the recruiting wins over and over. Man, I remember seeing him. It was an elite classic game. He was a true freshman. He told me about his purpose. He told me about his path, told me about how much he loved the dogs, how much he wanted to play for his family, his mother, his grandmother. And then you see him just grow up, man. I remember seeing him at an opening camp where I was pointing out to all the reporters, the national reporters, at an opening regional. It was in Orlando, and I was like, man, you need to watch out for that guy. And they're like, who's that? And everybody knew. I mean, he looked like he was walking around in Dark Knight Batman armor. He looked so cut up and chiseled how he grew when he first got there at ING Academy. And then you see him, I'll never forget him on the sidelines, man, the ultimate warrior type of player. Combination of great player, great charisma, great character, great leader. And when your alpha in the locker room is also the most passionate about Georgia winning, I mean, sometimes it's not really good for family TV, but some of the things Nolan would say on the sidelines to get his team jacked up before every game, before they left the field after warm-ups, it was a Georgia tradition, man. And I'm looking forward to seeing him probably doing the same thing again, even though he's not going to wear the red and black on Saturday.
Here's the other thing that this kind of brings up is, Jeff, I've been a college football fan for a long time, and I remember ESPN's College Game Day before it started traveling to campus week to week. That's how long I've been kind of around. That's how long I've sort of cared about stuff like this. And, we're kind of in a day and age now where maybe some people close to my age, perhaps even people younger, have kind of decided, we don't like Game Day anymore. David Pollock's not on there anymore. Pat McAfee's not everybody's cup of tea. Whatever. Lee Corso is probably, certainly past his prime in terms of, what he maybe once was on a show like that. Kirk Herbstreit's spread pretty thin now, doing NFL on Thursday night. Whatever the reasons are, I think there are a lot of people who sort of think we're still in kind of the post-game day era. But when it comes to your campus, it's a reminder to me that the show still matters, even more perhaps than I kind of wanted to. Wish it did. I'm not, frankly, as big a fan as I used to be either. But when you have all the chatter about who the guest picker is, when you have this, 3-hour commercial for the host program, in this case, UGA, you realize that is a lot of free earned media. And there is an element in which this show really still does kind of cut through the clutter, at least certainly for the large mass of college football fans. From your beat on the recruiting angle, when you get the big TV real estate like this, 9 a.m. for the game day, 7 p.m. with Fowler, Herbstreit, calling the game. When you talk about that kind of like television landscape for Georgia on Saturday, how valuable do you still view that to be for the program?
I think it's really invaluable, Brandon, especially the way Georgia recruits across the country now. They have to go to different parts of the country to get certain players, and they can compete with anybody, Brandon. You talk about maybe sentimentality here. I just wonder, and I hope this is happening. I know a lot of, longtime dogs tell me it is, and they're soaking it up. But Brandon, I don't know if we asked, 100 Georgia fans walking to the stadium on Saturday, maybe around the dog walk, if we asked them, what's the current win streak at? What's the current record for regular season win streak at? What's the current record for SEC win streak? I think, Brendan, it's all flying by so fast. I don't even know if people that have, their own Georgia rooms and their own man caves and they wear their favorite pair of red pants on Saturdays. I mean, I've said this on a couple programs recently, Brandon. I talked to people, some folks down at the Jacksonville Bulldog Club told me they have game day wear that they haven't seen Georgia lose a game in yet.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, and this is like really nice, high-end stuff, the type that Brandon Adams will wear on a game day. And, I mean, you just sit there and you go, man, 20-year-old Jeff, 30-year-old Jeff, 15-year-old Jeff would have just been breathing fire about her, but like, goodness gracious, how in the world is that happening? That would be like his history, like, you know, that you look at a gladiator movie and they make up Rome to be so important. And what we've heard and read and seen people tell us about the 1980s, man, I don't know if everybody in Sanford on Saturday walking around is fully aware of all the awesomeness that Georgia continues to check off. Like, and that game day is going to promote the best of Georgia football. It's really not just the 3-hour commercial, because then they'll come in at night, Brandon. And I expect with all the poking of the dogs this week, whether it's kindly or, you know, testing their manhood a little bit for fanhood, I think this crowd's going to be crazy, man. I think it's going to be crazy bonkers because everybody knows it's senior day. It's top 10. It's at night. It's under the lights. You're going to likely say goodbye to so many great dogs. It's the Brock Bowers storyline. I mean, sometimes we can get in the hype business, man, but if you want to put together a post or an article that says you put all these things together, the win streaks, maybe Brock Bowers' return, maybe his last game, saying thank you so much for everything, the great dogs like Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint, Cedric Bonpron Granger, maybe a Tate Ratledge, maybe even Brock Bowers, Kendall Milton. I mean, man, the list goes on and on and on. And a lot of these guys are going to look back at their Georgia careers and say, maybe we lost twice. Maybe we lost 3 times. And, I mean, that's just mind-boggling. I just hope everybody takes a moment. That's kind of what I do, man, before every game. I think of the 2020 season when we didn't get to see that. We didn't get to be in Sanford and watch this football program get better and better and play. And, I mean, that's a real soapbox moment for me, just soaking up how amazing all this is right now.
No, I think that's exactly right. How about Saturday from a recruiting standpoint of who are we expecting in the building and kind of what specific recruits could be swayed by what happens on the field with the Rebels on Saturday?
Yeah, I think it's different, Brandon. I think we have an NIL, name, image, and likeness development here. Been a while since we've seen Georgia welcome in official visitors from the junior college ranks, but they're welcoming in 2 on Saturday, man. And defensive lineman Beach Easy, Brian Taylor, he's out of Texas, and then Jaden Hamlin out of Valley, Alabama. Hamlin's actually on a plane right now to Athens. He'll probably be there by noon for his official visit. He's starting that one off early. And, you know, Hamlin's a guy who told me, Brandon, that the kids outside our region or the Georgia footprint or the ATL area, they really get it. Like, Hamlin told me, I just feel honored to be able to come and visit the nation's #1 program and the defending national champions. He's the #1 defensive tackle in the country, Brandon, for junior college DTs. LSU, Mississippi State. He grew up an Auburn fan. Those are the schools kind of circling around him. And he just told me it was an extreme honor that Georgia is taking the time to recruit him and thinks he's good enough to play there. It's almost like the young man has a level of reverence about coming to see Georgia play on an official visit. And he doesn't take that lightly. You don't see junior colleges. And the reason why that, Brandon, I know your mind is, you're nodding along, maybe even doodling on your notepad right there, you're thinking NIL, because Georgia and NIL with these defensive tackles probably not always going to go their way. It hasn't gone their way with a lot of their priority alpha high school targets along the defensive line. So Georgia's looking at 2 guys, one's about 6'5" and about 270. That's Taylor. And then you've got 6'4.5", 305, a 3-tech, which is Mr. Hamlin. You've got Nazir Johnson, another high school option on an official visit. He's committed to Florida, that he's looking really hard at Florida State. He's looking really hard at staying with Florida. He's looking hard at the Dogs. He's from Dublin, man. That's Georgia Bulldog territory. He grew up a Dog, but Florida showed more love. Florida maybe incentivized his recruitment a little bit more, and you get the feeling that the school that, you know, basically there's code words now, Brandon, in language where a kid says, I want to see I want that school to show me how much they want me. And I think most people can, even the cynics out in the world, can kind of read into that.
Yeah.
And you see all these the other big storyline for me is, I think another thing you take for granted, not a lot of people pay attention to, but the number one player in the country for 2024, that's Dylan Raiola. He's always there. He's going to be there. The number one player in 2025, Elijah Griffin from Savannah. He's back again to see Georgia again. And then the number one player for 2026, that's Julian Juju Lewis, although he's committed to USC. Going to go see the Dogs again. I chalk that one up as, maybe keeping things burning there in case Lincoln Riley moves on to the NFL. And I chalk that up to maybe just, maybe Georgia is a contender for him if things went south with a couple other options he had. Or maybe he just wants to see a really stinking great football game on display on Saturday. So I think another big storyline there is just Georgia's really going to try to sow the seeds with the 2025 class. Guys like Griffin, the 5-star defensive tackle I just mentioned.
Yeah.
Juan Gatson,
Yes.
the 6'8" man giant from Westlake's going to see Georgia for the second straight week in a 3-week stretch of seeing the Dogs. And, man, Brian, every time I see Juan, he looks like I see him around his teammates, and his teammates look like Russian nesting dolls, those ones that you keep opening up.
Sure.
Another player comes out or whatever. Like, I see him at Westlake High, and these are 6'2", 185-pound, 200-pound guys next to him, good-sized football players, and he just dwarfs them. And then there's a guy I wrote about yesterday on the site, man, Travis Smith Jr., Brandon. I really jumped into that trying to figure out wide receiver recruiting. I didn't know that the state of Georgia might have defensive linemen and quarterbacks and tight ends and running backs that grow on trees, but the elite wide receivers do not grow on trees in the state of Georgia. I went and calculated the cold hard data. It is very rare for the state of Georgia to produce a top 10 or a top 15 level receiver, and maybe that's an offshoot of why you and I are always talking about how in the world the Dogs keep losing receivers or can't get enough great receivers in each recruiting class. And it's not just the blocking. It's not just that Georgia didn't throw it like it does now with Carson Beck and then last year with Stetson Bennett. A little bit of that is the state of Georgia forces them to kind of import that wide receiver talent from other states because the elite guys in the country are not coming from the Peach State. And that's why Travis Smith is so important. I think he's the best receiver in the state this year outside of Mike Matthews of Parkview. And I think he's only going to get better, and he has all the size, speed, and tools you want to see in an elite SEC receiver.
Cameron McKell from Statesboro has announced a commitment date for himself coming up here near the end of this month. And Jeff, I have to admit, I have a hard time sort of figuring out exactly what's going on here when it comes to McKell. It seems pretty obvious that most of the schools around the country that are recruiting McKell seem to be giving him the option of playing wide receiver, which he wants to do. Seems like Georgia is still sort of pushing him as a defensive back. How much should a Georgia fan be paying close attention to what's going on with McKell right now? And is it still defensive side of the ball they should be looking at when it comes to McKell?
Nope. Brandon, I think the only way Georgia would win the recruitment for Cam McKell is with a heavy emphasis at playing the offensive side and being a receiver. That's what Cam wants, even though maybe his best NFL future might be with defensive back. And, he's a great player, man. And it's one of those recruitments that I'm just kind of scratching my head about because even in this day of name, image, and likeness, he's going to go see Colorado again for the second time this weekend. The thought of him pairing up with Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders is likely to come back next year for Colorado, so that's going to be some high-profile games and throwing the ball around, spreading the ball around to his receivers. And then he's going to visit Tennessee again as well before he makes his decision. So he's going to see two schools, which were among his very top contenders after Georgia. That never sounds good, Brandon. That never seems good. And the whole fact that I think if Georgia would have prioritized him as a receiver from the jump, he might have even been on the commitment board right now. And, the reasons why Georgia does that is because Georgia has an idea. Their evaluation is top tier. They saw McKell as a DB. They saw other wide receivers that they wanted in the class, and they had a really great one in Carr, a really great state of Georgia, rare top 15 receiver in Carr. But, Miami came, and, sometimes I laugh when you use the term money whip, but sometimes it's appropriate. And I think McKell, it's one of those recruitments that I wouldn't place a lot of confidence in right now, simply for all those reasons. And now when Georgia kind of, reverses its field and says, hey, come play wide receiver. We think you'd be great for us here. That doesn't work well at all, man. So, I think Georgia is kind of pulling against a couple of things that are have been going against it for a while in terms of the momentum of Cam McHale's recruitment.
Let me finish with this, if you don't mind. Tonight also begins the state playoffs across the state of Georgia. Good number of UGA commits will be in action. I'm lucky on the Peachtree Sports Network to have Sokovie White again against a Kell team who I think is as much fun to watch as anybody in the state. And by the way, speaking of Georgia commits, although different sport, Bryce Clavon, the Kell quarterback, who's also, at least for now, a Georgia baseball commit with obviously a very bright baseball future ahead of him. But then beyond that, I know we have Dylan Raiola getting ready to get going here, there as well. And I guess, Jeff, let me finish by asking you about Raiola in particular here. What kind of spotlight do you think he's going to have here in the 7A playoffs? Because obviously I would assume that Buford is viewed to be the favorite. I'm guessing the Maxwell ratings probably even have them mathematically as the most likely to win it. But in my mind, Jeff, I actually don't view Buford as an overwhelming favorite in the 7A playoffs. I take Colquitt County very seriously. I take Walton very seriously. Walton obviously beat Buford a year ago. There are a number of teams who I think could give the defending champs Mill Creek. Let me make sure I also mention them there as well. There are any who, by the way, beat Buford in the regular season. There are any number of teams who I think that could certainly give Buford a very big, game in the playoffs here coming up. I guess I'm curious, how much do you think that that this Buford team is going to be watched, Raiola watched in particular here? How much pressure do you think he perhaps feels in these 7A playoffs? And, how big of a favorite do you view Raiola's Buford team as being here right now?
I wouldn't know if I would put them as the favorite. I would say they've got the best defense. It's really funny with Buford. You want to see them protect Raiola better. I don't think that's going to happen. I think what you've seen out of Buford's offense this year, it is what it is. They've got a pretty easy stretch. I don't know, Brandon, you like to spy those brackets while you're sipping your cup of coffee and your bacon, egg, and cheese every morning. But, Buford's likely going to face a Norcross team in round 2. They get Wheeler tonight. Then they'll go likely going to meet kind of Grayson in that third round there. Grayson would be, the region champion and most likely might even be the home team in that thing, depending on where everybody goes. And then, the semifinals, they're likely going to probably catch a Colquitt. Perhaps the other side of the bracket there, you got I think I saw Collins Hill, you saw Milton, you saw Westlake, you saw Colquitt County. It's funny, the Mill Creek side of the bracket, that's got Walton in it. It's got a lot of teams. It's got Carrollton in it. That other side of the bracket is probably the harder one because, to answer your question, I think Walton can win it. I think Mill Creek can win it. I think Colquitt County can win it.
Yeah.
So there's maybe 4 or 5 teams I actually think in 7A that can win it. I'd watch Walton as much as anybody. That's kind of my dark horse pick because I really love the way they play football. They've got a hot quarterback. They've got a team that just is ready for these big games. They're always so really prepared to play. Really funny story, Brandon. Not funny, but you know how we started talking about Nolan and how we could just tell he was different from the start? You get a little bit of that with Raiola already. I see him, and I write about this often, Brandon, because it doesn't happen. I think I've written about it twice. It's just kind of natural how Raiola is more of a servant or like that Captain America leader type that always tries to take care of his guys and looks to his teammates first. And he does something very simple to most, but he'll come down from the recruiting lounge with 6 bottles of water in his hand. And he knows he's sitting around his future linemen and his future defensive guys or whatever. And he will bring those bottles and hey man, I'm playing water boy. I'm carrying your water. We hear sometimes sports writers carry water for certain programs and certain coaches. Well, Raiola's carrying the water for his future teammates, man. And that to me means something because I've never seen a 5-star do that, much less a 5-star quarterback, much less the number 1 guy in the nation. And Raiola has a dad that played 14 years in the NFL. There's a lot of ways for that young man to feel entitled or to feel like, he is holier than thou or he is quarterback golden arm, kiss the ring maybe. You get the total opposite of that with Raiola, man. Great example tonight. I think there's going to be 3 or 4 Georgia commitments whose seasons are over that play out of state that are going to come to watch Raiola play tonight in a first-round playoff game.
Wow.
Why do they want to do it? It's not going to be a great game. I think this might be another week where you see Buford winning by 30, 40 points. They want to do it because they have a connection and a relationship with Raiola, and they want to support their future quarterback, future one of the two quarterbacks in the class. They want to support somebody that has always made them feel like they are a big part of this class as well, Brandon. And we can go on and on about how far he can throw the ball and his rushing touchdowns recently that have shown a little bit of giddy up in his step. But that's the stuff that really wins over locker rooms. And, I say it all the time. I try to write about people on the way to play for the University of Georgia and not just great recruits. And Dylan Raiola is a great example of that. Brandon, you've got a tremendous example tonight with your game between Cal and Cat High School.
Yeah, no doubt.
Man, I don't know, and eventually I'm going to write the whole thing, and you guys, I'm going to try to break it up into a mini-series because the story is just so amazing. But Sokovie White will be one of the most special people/players to come through the University of Georgia. I was talking to a guy that would really, really know receivers in the state of Georgia, and he looked at Sokovie White. He kind of thinks of an upgraded Kieris Jackson, what he can be immediately at Georgia. I mean, everybody looks at him as the quick guy, the Ladd McConkey guy, but Brandon, he's going to enter that Georgia wide receiver room, being the strongest receiver in the room and probably one of the strongest players pound for pound on their team. And everybody thinks of Sokovie with quicks and jitterbug and playmaker, make you miss, and Sokovie is so much more than that.
Jeff, really, really good stuff. Thank you for being here as part of DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger here today. We'll look forward to seeing you in Athens tomorrow. And, of course, part of our DawgNation postgame show there as well. Always a fun thing on that. Jeff, good stuff. Thanks for your time.
Hey, man. See you, buddy. See you tomorrow. Have a great call tonight.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, Peachtree Sports Network for us tonight. Cass and Cal. We think it's one of the best games in the state here this weekend. At least certainly the best in the Atlanta area. I think Parkview going down to Valdosta is a really fun game there as well. You got some really good stuff. But here in the Atlanta area, we love our game tonight on Peachtree Sports Network. Cal, who has been red hot, winners of 9 straight. You're talking about the Cass Colonels and Sokovie White. Really, really fun battle. 2 high-powered offenses. Cal, highest scoring team in the 5A classification. So that's going to be a great time. I mentioned to Jeff as well. He's a regular participant in our DawgNation postgame show, and thanks to all of you who've been participants here this year there as well. First of all, thanks for tuning in and watching the show after the Georgia games. I appreciate that. But for those of you who leave the stadium, who come by to see us and hop on the air and share your thoughts about the Georgia win, what we hope is a Georgia win. We appreciate that. For those of you who clicked the Zoom link, we've had a great collection of calls here the last few weeks. People really sharing some strong opinions on Georgia, which makes the show so much better. I appreciate that. For the final time in Athens on Saturday, your chance to do that. Once again, I just really, really appreciate you being a part of all of that. Let me also say one thing about Dylan Raiola here quickly before we move on. If you get a chance on Saturday, if you have binoculars, something like that, you kind of train your binoculars down there on Raiola, kind of sitting in the front, typically of that recruit section there. One of my favorite things about Raiola is the way future Georgia player, of course, but man, while he's in the stands watching the current team play, he really kind of comes across as a UGA fan, which I really like. It's a fun thing to see. I'll give you a quick example of this. There was one moment a few weeks ago where he's sitting right there, obviously quarterback commit, kind of gets the front row seat, sort of something you might expect to see. And when it was time for the team to run out of the tunnel, they're coming out of the locker room, through the tunnel, onto the field, Raiola hops up and stands right there on the edge to see the team come by. Now, this is funny because this is a team that not only will Raiola play for next year, he could be the starting quarterback for, at least, conceivably anyway. And yet, to see the team come out of the tunnel, he's hopping up right there to see that. It's just kind of a fun thing. Being a high school senior is sort of an interesting world where you're sort of finishing, your childhood, so to speak, and moving on to your kind of next phase, near adulthood here as a college athlete. Just kind of fun to see sometimes the recruits sort of kind of stuck in both worlds a little bit. Raiola seems to really much enjoy cheering on Georgia as a future player, as a recruit, and if you get a chance to see that with your own eyes on Saturday, it's probably worth paying attention to. Let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I told you yesterday about the big DawgNation cruise. I've been telling you about this for a while. On the Oasis class ship coming up in April. But did you know Port Canaveral, the port that we sail out of, the one that's the most convenient for us here in the Atlanta area, is not only welcoming Oasis class ships on those 3 and 4 night sailings here this year, but also in July of 2024. How about the debut of a brand new Oasis-class ship courtesy of Royal Caribbean. It's called Utopia of the Seas. And you want to talk about taking it to the next level. So for so many people, my family included, sometimes the most convenient cruise vacation you can take is that 3 or the 4 night sailing. Now, if I can get away for a full week, 7 days, 7 nights, obviously I want to do that. But sometimes your schedule just prevents that from being the case. It's just a little bit more convenient. Take the 3 or the 4 night sailing. Well, Royal Caribbean understands that, and so therefore they say, okay, we're going to try to dominate that space more than anybody else, more than any other player in the industry. We're going to try to make the best experience possible for families on those 3 and 4 night sailings, especially going out of Port Canaveral, because that's a place where a lot of families do like to sail out of. And so now they're introducing the newest ship in the Royal Caribbean fleet when it debuts in July, Utopia of the Seas, specifically for those 3 and 4 night sailings. I think it's an exciting thing. So Jessica Slater's a great travel agent. She can tell you more about that. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, let's give you official predictions here. Now, I try to be modest. When you lose, say nothing. When you win, say even less. But honesty does compel me to admit my picks against the spread this year have been pretty good. So feeling like I'm on a little bit of a hot streak here, you can check out Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews later on this evening on the DawgNation video channels to get the full accounting of how well I've done here this year. But we've been doing pretty well here thus far, so perhaps you listen a little bit more closely to some of our picks here right now. Let me start with Georgia against Ole Miss. We've seen Georgia this week mostly about a 10.5-point favorite against the Rebels. Georgia is my pick here. I'm going to go with the final score somewhere in the neighborhood of sort of like that 30-13. I think that Georgia's proven to be the kind of offense that can find 30 or more against SEC opponents. I think that's a really important designation. Georgia's found that. We've been kind of calling for Georgia to give up no more than 13 points per game in this stretch that it's in right now. Admittedly, they haven't quite gotten there. They've given up 20 the last 2 weeks against both Florida and Missouri. The Florida was sort of a garbage time extra score. The Missouri was legitimate. But either way, Georgia's right now not quite at that 13-point per game mark, but we're going to once again kind of call for that on Saturday. Ultimately, this is what this kind of comes down to for me on both sides here for a moment. Obviously, much has been said, just sort of basing counting stats, just sort of basic, easy to understand metrics. Ole Miss has struggled on the road. That's a thing to kind of keep up with here. The Rebels are very well aware of that. But also, as we mentioned yesterday, Lane Kiffin compares this Georgia game to previous games that he's coached as Ole Miss coach against Alabama. And in those games, for the most part, Ole Miss just hasn't quite been equal to the task. They did have the one really close game in 2020 where there was a lot of points scored on both sides, but that was also pandemic. Perhaps you just sort of chalk that up to a weird game in what was otherwise a weird year. Other than that, Ole Miss 0-4 straight up against Alabama. They have covered the spread twice, but 3 of those 4 games have all been like the double-digit, 2-touchdown at least type losses for the Rebels against Alabama. For the most part, they haven't really been competitive. Therefore, you kind of assume the same thing could be in store against Georgia on Saturday. Now, from a point spread standpoint, this is a Georgia team that has certainly not quite been as dominant this year as it's perhaps been in the past, but track record probably also matters here too. Earlier this year, there was the back-to-back stretch against South Carolina and Auburn where Georgia failed to cover. That's the only stretch since November of 2020 where Georgia's failed to cover in back-to-back SEC games. Georgia last week missed the point spread mark against Missouri, so looking at 10.5 here right now, I think it stands to reason. I would say that this is a Georgia team that's going to probably be a little bit more in keeping with what we've seen in the past, finding a way to get to the pay window in SEC play, not failing to cover in back-to-back weeks. That's still pretty much a rarity for Georgia. They did do it earlier this year. So from that standpoint, I like Georgia minus the 10.5. I'm not going to stand on the table and scream and yell about this. I don't love the pick necessarily. I believe this game could be closer than that. But I think on the 10.5 side, I believe Georgia is the right side there on that. Another game of note in the SEC, it's 3:30 on CBS, and there are SEC East stakes at play there as well. Of course, that Georgia can take care of its own business and clinch the division, but perhaps it could already win the division before the game's even played on Saturday night, depending on what Tennessee does against Missouri. Perhaps some surprise that Missouri's the plus money side here in this spot, a 1-point underdog here, despite the fact that Missouri really played very well against Georgia last week, got some respect this week from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, has lost only twice here thus far this season. The explanation here is that Tennessee's a little bit of a darling of the analytics community. Sometimes you see this reflected in Vols point spreads. They're 14th in FPI here this week, as a for instance, there on that while to the naked eye, sometimes we see blemishes when we look at Tennessee, mathematically speaking, the calculator folks have kind of always found more to like with the Vols than perhaps you might think there on that. However, I do believe Missouri's the right side here in this game on Saturday, and I say that knowing full well that Luther Burden may not even play for the Tigers. The truth is, going back a couple of weeks ago, Missouri found a way to not just beat Kentucky, but actually beat Kentucky pretty handily on the road, despite the fact that day Luther Burden only had 2 catches. So it's not like Missouri hasn't played well before without a big contribution from Burden. They've done that in a win already this year. But in addition to that, there in Faurot Field in Como, they've also been pretty good when getting points. Now, they failed to cover as an underdog against LSU earlier this season, but that snapped a streak in which, prior to that, they'd covered 5 straight games when a home underdog. And the truth is, they would have covered against LSU there as well, if not for a pick 6 late in that game. So perhaps Missouri was the right side for most of that day, but even that notwithstanding, 5 consecutive covers as a home dog prior to that. On the flip side, Tennessee just 2-4 in its last 6 as a road team in the SEC, so they haven't always covered this mark when going on the road under Josh Heupel. And just flat out, I believe that Missouri's probably the better team here. So getting a point at home, I like Missouri to win the game there outright. A game that I think perhaps has a little bit of a point spread that might surprise you a little bit. Kentucky right now, just a 10.5-point home underdog with Alabama on Saturday. Some of this is probably recency bias. People see Alabama win the high-profile game last week against LSU. Everybody gets really excited until you realize, oh, yeah, that's LSU's 3rd loss here this season. Alabama, in beating LSU, doesn't even move up this week in the college football playoff top 25. To give you an idea of some of the chatter around Bama after this LSU game has perhaps been overstated. Now, Bama has covered 2 straight games in the SEC here, but prior to that had failed to cover in 6 of its last 7 games in the league, before that. This is a team that's had a little bit of a tough time in cover situations when you're going on the road, I should say. So it had 2 straight road covers coming into Saturday, but failing to cover in 6 of its last 7 road games prior to that. Wildcats on the other side, typically pretty good at home. They've covered 4 straight games at home when an underdog of 10 or more points. Georgia can certainly speak to that there a little bit. This is a game, perhaps a slightly contrarian take, but I actually like Kentucky to maybe give Alabama a little bit of a heat check and keep it within the 10.5 there on Saturday. We'll step outside of SEC play here really quick. The biggest game nationally is Michigan going to Penn State. It's a 4.5-point number. Michigan, to its credit, has been truly dominant here this year. You can say what you want about Connor Stallions. We can laugh all we want as Georgia fans, but the love and the hype that Michigan's gotten, we call them mighty Michigan around here. But the truth is they've had a dominant season. Do you realize that no one yet this year's had a 1st and goal against Michigan? That's how dominant they've been. No one's gotten inside the 10-yard line on them defensively all year long. They've given up points. They just haven't given up a 1st and goal yet here this year. That gives you an idea of how dominant Michigan's been. On the flip side of that, Penn State still very much alive in the race for the Big Ten East. They did lose to Ohio State, but they get a chance to host Michigan here on Saturday. The problem for the Nittany Lions is, despite the fact they're top 10 nationally in points scored per game, they're 127th in plays of 20 or more yards. They found a way to score points. They're just not very explosive. And I think the lack of explosiveness on the part of Penn State is probably enough to kind of eliminate any chance they have of keeping this closer than that 4.5-point number. The truth is, this is kind of been about where Penn State has been for most of the James Franklin era. They're as a good team, they're better than the bad teams, but they really aren't very competitive with the so-called great teams, with the teams at a level above where they are. They can't seem to break through that glass ceiling, and I think Saturday's another example of that being the case. I also believe that Michigan's probably a little bit motivated here. There's all kinds of talk about punishment from the Big Ten regarding the sign-stealing allegations. Connor Stallions is gone now. Presumably, Penn State's smart enough to have changed its signals for this game. I think that Michigan probably wants to show it can win a game without the perceived extra advantage here. So I like the Wolverines minus the 4.5 points. I'll give you 2 more really quickly from outside the SEC. I like Washington minus 9.5 against Utah. I think Utah probably slightly inflated here on the virtue of a 55-3 win last week against Arizona State. But if you go back and look at that game, Sundale was pretty banged up there in that spot. I think the true Utah is probably the one that could not stay with Oregon at home the week prior to that. That kind of gives you, I think, a better picture of what Utah is right now. And going to Seattle, no easy place to play. Perhaps the Huskies figuring some things out last week, going on the road and giving up yards and points, but still finding a way to get a double-digit win against USC. I like the Huskies here minus 9.5 to sort of stay in that national championship hunt. And I'll also give you Florida State minus 14.5 against Miami. I don't love this game at this number, but Florida State this season has covered 3 of its 4 games when favored by 14 or more here this season. So perhaps they're showing you they're okay here in this spot. But even with Tyler Van Dyke, the Miami quarterback, perhaps injured and perhaps not able to play, still seems a little scary here at such a large number, just given the nature of rivalry games, things like that. But I believe that Florida State, ranked number 4 this week by the College Ball Playoff Selection Committee, probably worthy of your trust there on that spot. And we will make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as we wrap up here today, we will give you a good collection of golden shoes. Some of these we had planned for yesterday before the little glitch happened, and then a great way to kind of roll into a fun football weekend. If, of course, you're making your own picks on games this weekend, best of luck to all of you there on that. Let's roll through some golden shoes. How about our buddy Waylon Wilson here, giving you Dejon Edwards. Waylon's a terrific artist. He always gives you these really cool graphics here. The playmaker, the road to go for 3 in 23. Sees Dejon Edwards as the guy heading into Ole Miss. I like that, Waylon. You're a talented dude. We'll give you a golden shoe for that, very much so. We talked earlier about the idea of Brocktober, not exactly going the way we hoped it would, but we were going to try not to get too hyped up about Bauer's eventual return. However, that doesn't stop our buddy Ed Hare from saying, can we maybe have a Brocksgiving? Brocktober was a little bit of a flop. How about Brocksgiving? I like that, with the possibility that Bowers could return on Saturday. Good stuff, Ed, to you. We'll give you a golden shoe for that. Well, I'll talk about what the crowd was perhaps not last week, but our buddy Jackleg writes in to say, I'm going to have to push back some on that criticism. He says, I lost my voice Saturday. Crowd was loud enough to cause almost 2 fumbled snaps, and then amazing memories of an SEC battle. He shares some good photos of his family there, which you'd love to see. He also gives you the go for 3 in 23 and the beatdown of Kiffin and the Rebs. Jack, we appreciate that. Really great photos. We'll give you a well-earned golden shoe for that, and we appreciate you bringing that energy last week, this week, every week in between. Jimmy Durham, on the subject of rumors, has a joke for us that my best friend, sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from this guy who knows this kid who's going with the girl who blah, 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 31 flavors last week, that the dogs may be wearing black jerseys there on Saturday night. So all kinds of rumors flying here this week. Don't know that we'll see the black jersey, but it would look good under that Saturday night sky. That'd be a really cool thing to see. And Jimmy, that's a very funny from you. We will give you a golden shoe for that. Then finally, Clint Haynes writes in, hashtag go for 3 in 23, with Kirby Smart wearing the Darth Vader costume saying, Bama, I am your daddy. The back-to-back national championship trophies in the background there to kind of go along with the go for 3 in 23 trophy that was with us here a little earlier for today. You love all of that. Great, well-earned golden shoe coming your way there too, Clint. Really, really good stuff. And, of course, lousy, stinking Gators. We'll finish off the week by reminding them it's been now 1,098 days since Florida has beaten Georgia. That number keeps going up. We'll see you in Athens on Saturday. Be loud. Kirby Smart told you to. Give him what he wants, and we'll be back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll talk to you then, everybody. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. All right, so we're going to get your comments here. We're going to kind of roll through. Did you guys hopefully got a chance to see the trophy a little earlier? How much fun was that? A really cool thing. And we'll get your comments here. Let me plug in for a second. And we'll get into it here on a Friday. Y'all better be loud now, too. Kirby wants that from you. For those of you who are lucky enough to be there, Kirby Smart wants you to be loud. So give him what he wants there on that. All right, let me go to YouTube. I may still be locked out of Facebook, by the way, too. I never did get signed back in there. But I'll go to YouTube here right now. Thomas Van Santa says he's definitely wearing red for the game. I kind of like black Georgia gear, though. Like, blackout, whatever else. Now, while red, I like black with a kind of a pop of red, if you want to really get into my sort of fashion stuff. Waylon Wilson, by the way, Golden Shoe winner in the YouTube comment section right now, says, thanks for the Golden Shoe. A few talking heads on YouTube are predicting Brock making at least 1 touchdown tomorrow night. Yeah, I don't know that I can go that far. I mean, maybe I'll be wrong. I mean, I'm wrong all the time. But that seems a little rich for my blood. A little rich for my blood. Frank Patterson also mentioning correctly, Ole Miss dealing with an offensive lineman injury, offensive tackle injury here this week. That's a pretty big deal there as well. Good point to bring that up. Joshua Green says that's a great message from Kirby Smart. You better believe that it is. BR on the subject of Marius Mims. Yeah, physical conditioning could be interesting there for a guy like Mims who's been limited on his ankle. How well conditioned is he right now? That could be a fair question. That could be a very fair question. Let me get one from up here too. BR says, I'd like to see McKell and Jalen Walker pick up steam and crash the quarterback a few times. I like that. Foster Moss says, this ain't no wine and cheese chat. That's good to know, Foster. Glad to know that. Memphis Dog says, is BA right when he says he's wrong all the time? It's like my grandfather used to say, I thought I was wrong once, but I was mistaken. That was one of his favorite jokes. Let me go to DawgNation.com because the other day I got criticized by them. BMAC says if Ole Miss scores first on Saturday, he predicts it'll be a close game. Yeah, some of that, it's like there definitely is a sense that sometimes you can see early on how a game is going to go. That an early score from Ole Miss sort of suggests, oh, maybe they hang around for a while. But, Florida also marched down the field and scored on Georgia, and that was all there was. Randy Hall asking about not seeing the link to call in on Saturday night. I don't know, Randy. Hopefully we'll get those on every chat there on Saturday. Hopefully that'll be the case, Randy. Ken Holcomb says, I'm looking forward to seeing Georgia kind of pull away with a 2-touchdown lead in the fourth quarter. Everybody be loud. That's right, Kent. You challenge them. That's exactly right. Brooksy says, I believe being Brock's last home game, he will start, but will only play in the red zone until he warms up. Yeah, maybe that's the case. Sling Blade Napier says the Ole Miss offensive line, they aren't super athletic, but our defensive line should be able to eat. Look at how athletic Stackhouse is. That's a really good point. Let me see if I can get on Facebook. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to. Maybe I can. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah, it's not going to let me. Let me try over here one more time. Let's try this one more time. See how this goes. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm sorry, y'all. I'll try to get this figured out by next week, but I can't do this right now. Keith Dog asked an interesting question. Can we lose the SEC and still make the college football playoff? I don't believe so. Now, that could change. But, I think that you probably want to watch. Here are, to me, the teams that are still alive for the college football playoff. Arguably, Penn State still is, so I'll give you 3 Big Ten teams, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. 1 ACC team, that's Florida State. You've got Texas, and you've got 2 Pac-12 teams, Washington and Oregon. And that's it for the playoff, right? Oregon, Washington, Texas, Florida State, Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State. Those are the teams that are still alive for the college football playoff. So here's what I think you need. I think you need as many one-loss conference champions as possible. In other words, I think you would prefer – you don't want an undefeated Washington team because, the one thing the committee has no history of doing is taking one-loss teams ahead of unbeaten teams. For everything the committee says it does, the one thing they consistently do every year is they put excessive value on the team with the fewest losses from within the Power Five. That's just what they do. So an undefeated team would get probably a pretty big nod there. In that case, it could be Washington. Florida State could be the same way. So if you've got 2 undefeated Power 5 champions, I believe that's 2 playoff spots that are gone. And now you're kind of talking about, well, okay, what if the Big Ten champ's 13-0 and undefeated? Of course they're going. You would assume the Big Ten champ's going to make it no matter what. And so now you're kind of down. You're kind of down to 3 spots. I should say now you're kind of down to just 1 spot left. And if Bama's to use your scenario, if Bama's a 12-1 SEC champ, well, they would seem to have that nod over Georgia. If Texas is a 12-1 Big 12 champ, they would have beaten Alabama. It just becomes a very tough argument to win. Now, I've already kind of thought about this. If I'm on, because we always do the playoff show on that Sunday. If I'm on the air on that Sunday, I'm going to go cable news style, and I'm going to argue in favor of Georgia because if I don't, who will? But speaking to you as objectively as I'm capable of right now, that would be a very tough argument to win. It would be. Some years it's just easier to be the runner-up. The last 2 years we've seen conference runner-ups make the playoff, runners-up make the playoff. Big Ten last year, SEC the year before. This year feels like a pretty tough year to do that. Now, if you get to that spot, here's what my argument's going to be. Georgia's the two-time champion. They deserve to lose their championship. If they're going to lose it, they deserve to lose it on the field and not in the boardroom. That's the argument that I'm going to make. But just chatting here right now among friends, be a pretty tough situation. Now, if you see one of these Pac-12 teams lose a game, all of a sudden it becomes a little easier to kind of say, okay, well, what is the Pac-12 really? Or if you see Florida State drop a game, okay, well, it becomes a little easier. So I think you probably want to root for losses from some of these teams, the Texases, the Florida States, the Washingtons, the Oregons. You just probably want to root for losses. I think you want as much chaos as you can get. If you want the insurance policy for Georgia, if that's what we're talking about right now, if you want the insurance policy for Georgia, then you probably want as much chaos as you can possibly get. Senior Dog 54 says Bama is a sprained ankle away from having a poor offense. In my opinion, without Milroe, they would struggle with Auburn. I think that's probably true. I mean, like we saw the numbers of the day, Georgia would be, more than a field goal favorite against Alabama. When you get to December, you've got to play somebody. I think that Alabama, I believe, is actually probably about as close to a favorable matchup for Georgia as could get, I think. Now, people say, well, Georgia hasn't stopped the running quarterback, and that's true. But you've got to play somebody. And this, to me, is a far cry from what Alabama has been. So could be famous last words. Obviously, it's going to hurt if Georgia loses, no matter when it does. But given the fact that you've got to play someone in a possible elimination game, I would welcome that game against Alabama based on what I believe Alabama to be right now. Scott Harris says, it was so hard listening to Dan Mullen call that game last night. Every time he mentioned what it took to win, my eyes rolled hard, which is very funny. Obviously, Mullen better at talking about what it takes to win than actually doing what it takes to win. I guess that's the case. Brandon Griffin says, I think that you could see Brock Bowers being used as a decoy to open it up for some of the wide receivers. Yeah, that's probably a little bit more in keeping with what I expect. I mean, if you want to be completely frank, if Bowers plays tomorrow, I believe he is playing just so he can say that he played. That's what I believe you're probably talking about. And I believe that you could see him assuming that Georgia wins tomorrow, and as a double-digit favorite, it's not a huge assumption. Bowers tomorrow, I believe, would play just so that he shows up in the participation report for what is going to likely be his final home game. And then Tennessee game and Tech game, I believe, would then become about getting back up to game speed for the elimination game that we believe that Georgia could be playing in the SEC championship. That's what I really believe this is about. Somebody mentioned this earlier about the conditioning level for Mims coming off his own ankle injury. That's a different situation because that's an offensive lineman compared to someone like Brock Bowers, who's already in pristine physical condition. But kind of getting back up to game speed probably takes you a little while. So you show up in the Ole Miss game, you work through some things, Tennessee, Tech, and maybe you are really ready to go for the Alabama game, if that's indeed who Georgia's playing, which obviously mathematically it's almost a certainty that it will be. That's kind of what I sort of think this is probably building towards. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised to find out. No, he's far more ready far sooner than I expect, but I'm not quite so sure. Morris Rich says, I think the only way we get into the playoffs is to win out. I can promise you this. I will be full on war paint. If Georgia were to, let's say, lose on Saturday, Georgia were to lose to Ole Miss, which, gosh, just the thought of that, just shudder the thought. But let's say that it did. And then Georgia went on to beat Tennessee next week to clinch the SEC East and win the SEC. Now they're 12-1 as a one-loss conference champion. I can promise you this. I will go on full-on war paint if that team is not allowed to defend its championship on the field. If they get pencil whipped in some boardroom, you better believe that we're going to be full-on war paint for that. We just will be. That to me would be an egregious miscarriage of justice. I don't believe the committee would do that. But I am not willing to listen to an argument for, well, actually, Georgia played the blah, blah, blah schedule. This is the two-time national champion. If they are a 12-1 conference champ, they defend their title on the field. They just do. That's what I believe. Sling Blade Napier says, if you are in Section 130 sitting down, you will get me kicked out of Sanford Stadium. There you go, Sling Blade. That's very funny. Ken Holcomb says it's going to freak out Kiffin and Pete Golding, the Ole Miss defensive coordinator, into changing their scheme just to have Bauer's presence on the field. Yeah, maybe gives you something else to think about for sure. Let me go back to YouTube here for a moment. Thomas Van Santa says, Georgia ain't losing to nobody, you heard? By the way, good to see Thomas in the comment section. I felt like we hadn't seen him in a minute or two here. Chicken Bone News and 225 Girl talking about the downtown in Milledgeville. I do like Milledgeville. It's kind of a cool place. Jonathan Aaron says a couple things. First, why aren't you asking Jeff the hard question if 5-star Connor Stallion is going to be here tomorrow? And the rumor's true that Game Day asked you first, but you declined. Well, I would never want to take that spotlight away from Nolan Smith. So if I was asked by Game Day to be there, of course I would not be at liberty to say. And plus, I want Nolan Smith to have the attention he deserves, I say kiddingly. Yeah, and Connor Stallions, yeah. You kind of wonder what happens to Stallions from here, right? Sometimes I think about Stallions from this respect. Like, one of my greatest fears is, like, accidentally committing fraud. Like, if you ever read the story of how, like, Martha Stewart went to prison, you know, like the insider trading stuff, part of me, when I see stories like that, I'm always, like, left to conclude, if I had been in this spot, would I have known not to do this? You know, sometimes it's sort of hard for me to know, just to be completely honest with you. Like, what's actually like a criminal, you know, written in the criminal statute, sometimes in real life can sort of feel a little bit weird. Like in the case of Stallions, this is a guy, you know, young guy growing up, very ambitious, obviously, wanted to be a very big part of Michigan football. And so he has gone to great lengths to be a part of Michigan football, to the point where you almost wonder eventually do we hear about, I'm not saying he did, I'm saying, but he's done so many really weird things that you almost wonder, is it about to get even weirder where eventually we find out, oh, he actually did break the law when he did this, that, or the other. I mean, just given the crazy stuff that keeps coming out about him, you kind of wonder if it could perhaps go there next, which makes me think back to when I was a young guy of, if I really thought I had a chance to make a big positive impact on Georgia football, how willing would I have been to be able to take that very, very far? Hopefully not quite so far that I did some of the things that Stallions is alleged to have done, or perhaps some of the things we'll hear about him coming out in the future. But you just kind of wonder. It's like a whole lot of ambition and a very little bit of wisdom cannot sometimes be the world's greatest combination. And in the case of Connor Stallions, you sort of wonder if that might be the situation there. Jenna Smith on the subject of Ohio State saying that's why Ohio State is propped up. Number one, when they lose to Michigan, they'll drop to 4. Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about that. I mean, I know that people do say, being ranked here early just gives them the chance of sort of staying in. I really don't think you have to worry about that, because like the one thing the committee always has in its back pocket is they can always, as their bylaws allow them to, give, whatever the phrase is, deference to conference championships. So they take the at-large team when the conference champion's a team they don't want to take. But if it's a conference champion they want to take, they're not obligated to take Ohio State because Ohio State's been ranked in the top 4. That's just not necessarily how they would do it. And this is a year, I think the committee would be more than happy to take some of these geographically diverse conference champions. They'd love to have Texas in the playoff. A Pacific Northwest team that's legitimately, in there, like a Oregon or a Washington, I believe they'd love to take them. Florida State sort of represents a little bit of new blood. I think they would, be more than happy to take Florida State. This is a year in which, for the powers that be that have always wanted this to be a national sport, for at least right now, college football sort of feels like a national sport. Now, some of this may change too, right? Because we have a tendency to sort of think, oh, we're just sort of rubber stamped, and now we're just kind of, sort of playing out the string here with all these teams marching towards inevitability. College football has a way of not quite being that. So we may still get chaos. And the more you get chaos, the more you invite the second SEC team or the second Big Ten team to be back in the discussion. You do invite that. But in the case of Ohio State, if Penn State, who's only it's like 4.5 is not a huge spread, y'all. Penn State's playing at home as a 4.5 point underdog. If Penn State beats Michigan, all of a sudden now Ohio State's not the second team from the Big Ten anymore. It's probably could be a combination of like Penn State and Michigan at that point in time. We have a way in which the round robin works out, where Ohio State wins home game against Penn State wins home game against Michigan wins home game against Ohio State, where, you could still see the Big Ten perhaps thrown into a little bit of chaos here too. So we're far from done there on all of that. But the more chaos you get from the other leagues, ACC, Big 12, Pac-12, the more you do invite the second team from the Big 10 and the SEC to be more a part of this discussion, whoever that second team turns out to be. And it's probably still a little early to truly know who the so-called second team might be there. Let's see what else. BR wonder if we can fit a Royal Caribbean cruise ship on the Tennessee River for next week's DawgNation Invasion. Yeah, next week is Invasion Week. I'm excited about that. What a great time, right? We got the National Championship Trophy in here today. We're go for 3 and 23 on that. You got the the DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River next week. Georgia could clinch the East here this weekend. I am just happy about all of that. Julian Harris says his Dr. Pepper predictolator, which is a very funny thing, showed him 4 false starts caused by the Georgia crowd there on Saturday. I'll take that number. I believe I'll take that number. All right, let me go to DawgNation.com here. And Facebook, I'm sorry, y'all. I know I'm getting screamed at over there. Trippy Charlie checks in to say, I think it depends on who wins the Michigan-Ohio State game. If Michigan wins, they're going to wait until next year. I wonder what that is. Yes, I mean, Michigan's obviously going to be, decent favorite. Certainly at home against Ohio State, they're, decent-ish favorite over Penn State there on Saturday. But you could still get some craziness there. BMAX says Florida State needs to lose to Florida in its last game here this season. Boy, you talk about getting wild. That would get wild quickly. Hemingway does not want Bowers playing meaningful snaps tomorrow. I think you're probably looking at somewhere in that sort of 10 to 15 range. Let's see what else. So good comments rolling through here. We're going to get ready to wrap it up for today. Get ready to move on a Friday. Wayne Haynes got it 41-21. Appreciate that. Paul Moon says, I do not want Bowers in the field. He says, I don't want him to try to go at like 85%. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that we learn in sports, right? It's like 85% of Brock Bowers is probably not quite what you want. You would think you would, right? It's a great player. I'll take 85% of Bowers. But it's really so much better to kind of give the extra week, let the guy get something closer to 100%. You just get so much more value out of that. You really do. I think that's true. All right, Facebook folks, sorry about that for today. Let me try one more way of getting to this. Let me try one more way to get to Facebook. Let's see if I can. I don't think this is going to work either. I'm going to try one more time on this to see if I can go like Facebook the Phantom way. Let's see if I can do this. It's probably not going to let me do this. Let's see if I can. Oh, look, this may work. Okay. Yeah, there's William Camacho in there.
I don't think this is going to work.
All right, let's see if I can try this. Am I going to be able to get this? Maybe not. Maybe that's not going to work. I tried, y'all. I saw William Camacho there for a second. I don't think this is going to work. One more time to try this? No, it's not going to work. All right. Anyway. Hey, good stuff, everybody. Thanks for being here. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised. The price is promised. By the way, don't forget, Go With The Flow, presented by RS Andrews later on this evening on the DawgNation video channels. More of our thoughts on the big games. I'll try to stay hot and keep picking winners there on that show for you. And, of course, speaking of winners, hopefully Georgia's a winner on Saturday. Chance to own the East for the last time by beating Ole Miss on Saturday or by getting a Tennessee loss in the hands of Missouri prior to that. Historic day for the Dogs, perhaps, and a fun one between the hedges. Kirby Smart makes it clear what he wants from you. Make sure you give it to him. And then we'll see you back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then.